So we can store data. How about fetching? Because obviously we can delete recipes, right? We can get rid of all of them. And in that case, we got a problem here, and we want to be able to fetch data in that case so that we can load all the recipes we have on the server. For loading data, we can again use the data storage service, which makes sense because if we started using that for interacting with the backend, we should definitely stick to it. And there we can now simply add a fetch recipes method, which should be triggered when we click that other button in the header component. So this button, the fetch data button here. Let's already add that click listener and call this on fetch data or whatever you want to call this method, which gets called. And that method needs to be added to the component body, of course. And in there, the goal now is to use the data storage service and call fetch recipes. Now, of course, right now in fetch recipes, we're not doing much. So let's change this by again using the Angular HTTP client. And there we can now send a GET request. Now, obviously, the URL to which we want to send that request is that same URL we're using up there. So let's add that URL here. And let's send a request there to get our recipes. Now, just as before, the question is, where do we want to subscribe? And the answer is, where are we interested in the response? Are we interested in the header component? Well, not really, in my opinion. What would we do with the recipes here? We're not using the recipes in the header. So I'm not really caring about the recipes here, and hence there is no strong reason to subscribe here. Instead, it would be fine to just subscribe in the data storage service, where we already inject the recipes service, because maybe we can do something with the recipes service then to push or to move our fetched recipes into that recipes service, which in the end is the place where we do manage our recipes. So let's subscribe here. And we should be getting back our recipes here, though let's first of all console log this to get an idea of the format of data we get. So we got everything in place. Let's save that, go back to our application, and it's reloaded in the meantime, which is why the recipes are back here. And let's click Fetch Data. That's looking good. We're getting an array, note the square brackets, we're getting an array of recipes. So since these recipes already have the right format, we should be able to just set our currently loaded recipes equal to these ones to override them with the fetched recipes. And for that, in the recipe service, we now just need a method that allows us to override the existing array of recipes. Because we have that starting array of recipes, and we have a function to get the recipes, which means return them from the recipe component from the recipe service to another component. And then we have the same for a single recipe and so on, but we have no method to override that array of recipes here. And it's time to do so now. So let's add a new method in the recipe service, which we can call setRecipes. And there we should get an array of recipes. So let's make it really clear by adding that type. And the idea here is simple. This recipes should be set equal to the recipes we're getting as an argument here. And this will override our recipes here with, well, these recipes. The important thing here just is, since we're changing the recipes, we should then also call this recipes changed next and push a copy with the slice method of our recipes there so that we inform all interested places in our app that we got new recipes, just as we're doing it when we're updating a recipe or deleting a recipe. So with that, we're setting the recipes equal. Now, in the data storage service, instead of logging the recipes, we can use the injected recipe service and call setRecipes to forward our recipes there. Now, we're getting an error here because TypeScript does not understand that the recipes we're getting here really are an array of recipes. And that makes sense. It just understands that here we have the body of an HTTP response, and that could be anything. And therefore, to inform TypeScript about the type, we should indeed add the generic annotation to the get method here, where we can make clear which format our extracted response body will have. And therefore here I will add a recipe array, and that now requires me, or requires us if you're following along, to import the recipe model here from the recipes area. so that we can use that type in the data storage service. And now TypeScript does not complain anymore, because now TypeScript understands that the response body will indeed be an array of recipes, and therefore we can validly forward this here. With that out of the way, let's give this a try. Let's first of all delete all these recipes here, and let's now fetch them. And that's looking good. Here they are again, and if we send this to the shopping list, for example, that all seems to work. So we can now manage our recipes, and now we are indeed storing them on a server. We're almost done, but there is some cleanup work we can do related to that. It's nice that we can now load and store our recipes. That first of all means that we no longer need our default recipes here though. So I will comment that out just to have it around in case we do need it again or we want that dummy data again. But I will initialize the recipes property, which is an array of recipes just as before, as an empty array now, so that when our app loads, we have no recipes and we need to load them. That of course is optional, but I guess it makes a bit more sense than loading some dummy data. Obviously, you could do the same in the shopping list area. Now that's the first change. And we also have a bug in this application which we should fix. Let's say we add a new recipe here, summer salad. Let's add this image here, a juicy summer salad. And now the important thing, I won't add any ingredients to that recipe. Instead, let's save it like this, which is valid. We don't need to have recipes. We don't need to have ingredients. And now let me store that. So let's click Save Data. And on Firebase, you can see there is a new item. And that's our summer salad. But please note, obviously it has no ingredients. Now, generally our app works here. But to prevent nasty bugs, when we're fetching the recipes, it would make sense that we make sure that we always have ingredients, even if it's just an empty array, but that the data we loaded in the end has some ingredients, and this property is not undefined. Because if we otherwise try to directly interact with the ingredients, we could get errors. And for that, we can simply add pipe here to our fetch recipes HTTP request and add the map operator, which allows us to transform that data. For that, we just need to import map from RxJS operators. And this, as you learned, is an observable operator that allows you to transform the data in an observable chain, so right before subscribe. Here we get our recipes, but the recipes that might not have an ingredients property. And now here we can simply return recipes, but call map on these two. And now this can be confusing. Map here in pipe is an RxJS operator. Map here is called on an array, and therefore the normal JavaScript array method map. They happen to have the same name, but they are not the same function. That's an RxJS operator called as a function like this inside of pipe. That is a JavaScript array method. Now map simply allows us to transform the elements in an array, in this case in the recipes array. It takes an anonymous function which is executed for every element in that array, so therefore for every recipe, and we return the transformed recipe. Now here my idea is to return the original recipe, but if that recipe doesn't have an ingredients array, to set ingredients to an empty array instead. And for this, I will return a new object where I use the spread operator to copy all the properties of recipe, to copy all the existing data. And then ingredients will be set equal to, and now I'll add a ternary expression where I simply check whether recipe ingredients is true-ish, which it is if it is an array with 0 or more elements. And if that is the case, then I will set ingredients equal to recipe ingredients, which means I will not change it. But otherwise, I'll set it to an empty array. So if this here is kind of false, which is the case if ingredients is undefined, if it's not set, then I will set it to an empty array instead. And that's just a tiny improvement here in this observable chain, which doesn't break our app. Of course, it shouldn't. We can still edit our recipe here, interact with it, save that, and everything works as before. But now we have a little bit more protection against unexpected errors, because now we ensure that the ingredients property of the loaded recipes is always set to at least an empty array.